Welcome back. So this week we are going to be working on making a book about how the founders decided on a type of government. Now that they're done fighting for their independence, they have to set up their own government. And I'm hoping that you have watched at least one of Mr. Langley's lessons at this point. What I did is I took that material and I made kind of a one-page summary of some of the big ideas. So it would be great if you had this with you. If you need to pause the video and go grab this, you can. The other thing that you will need is a couple of pieces of blank paper. If you don't have any that isn't lined, that's okay. You can use lined. You could use paper from your printer, or if you have something like construction paper or watercolor paper, that would be great too. But at least a couple pages about this size, all right? Okay, so this is the summary, and I'm just gonna read it and talk about it a little bit, and you can just follow along. Now that the colonies wanted to form their own government, they had to decide what kind of government they wanted. They had had enough of being ruled by King George in Parliament, that's for sure. The founders looked back in history to get inspiration. They studied the governments of Athens, Greece, and of the Roman Republic. They also read a book written by an Englishman named John Locke. John Locke wrote about natural rights. He said that natural rights were rights that every person was born with. They didn't need to earn them in any way. Everyone just had them. And these rights included life, which meant the right to live safely without fear of being injured or killed by someone. Liberty, the right to be free, to say what you wanted to say, to believe what you wanted to believe, to practice the religion that you wanted to practice, things like that. And property, which means the right to own things, like to own your own home, to own your own belongings, and in some cases to own land or a business. Okay? And then in this book also, he talked about a state of nature. So a state of nature would be where there were no laws, no government, no rules, and everybody just had their natural rights to do as they pleased. And he said, if you imagine that, probably it wouldn't work. It would be chaos. You would have your natural rights, but other people would probably interfere with them. So he said, this is why you need government. Now, you have a government, you have laws. If you have laws, that means you lose some of your freedoms, right? For example, you don't have the freedom to rob a bank, right? But those kind of keep the balance. They keep people from doing things they shouldn't do. It protects you from being harmed by people. So it was kind of a trade-off. You give up some of your freedoms and your natural rights are protected. So he said some people would try to violate our natural rights. They might steal our property or harm us. Maybe they would try to control what we said or did. For this reason, John Locke said we need a government, and the main job of government is to protect our natural rights. So that does mean you have to give up some of our freedoms. We can't just do anything. You can't have the right to property and the ability to steal. You can't have the right to life and freedom to punch someone. You can't have the liberty to go wherever you want if where you're going is someone else's house so that you can punch them. You get the idea. Okay, here's what the founders learned from the Greeks and Romans. They studied the government of Athens, one of the main cities in Greece. Athens had a direct democracy. This meant that every citizen of Athens made the laws and elected their leaders. Remember though, Athens is just one city. It's not a whole country. Also, citizens did not include everyone. Slaves and poor workers were not considered citizens, and so they did not have a say in the government. The founders also studied the Roman Republic. Rome was a large republic with hundreds of towns and cities and a huge area of land, so much bigger than the city of Athens. So they had many more people to govern. Rome had two groups that made the laws. They were the Senate, who were chosen by the oldest and most wealthy families of Rome, and the Assembly, who were chosen by wealthy middle-class Roman citizens. Each year, the Senate and the Assembly chose consuls who carried out the laws. Again, there were many people who were not considered citizens, slaves and poor people mostly. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about direct democracy and then a little bit about representative democracy. Direct democracy, where everyone got a vote, worked okay in some of the small towns in the colonies. There were small towns that were already using that form of democracy. They would have town meetings when they needed to decide something or solve a problem. But it's not very efficient for a whole country. It's a little bit like if you can imagine like you and your friend deciding what the rules of Foursquare are going to be and what that would be like, and both of you had an equal say in determining the rules versus every kid in West Woodland trying to decide on the rules of Foursquare. Not super efficient, right? Okay, so making laws and governing is a full-time job. In order to do it well, you really have to understand how government works. You have to know how what the people need and how to do all of those things. And you've got to be voting and discussing and researching and writing. If every person has to do that, who's going to milk the cows and sell the groceries and build the houses and all of those other jobs, right? So people had other things to do, so they needed a representative democracy where elected representatives made the laws and ran the government. Those representatives had to protect everyone's rights. So representative democracy is more efficient, but that means that those representatives, they're representing everybody, so they have to do a good job of taking everybody's rights and needs into account when they're making their laws, right? All right. At first, our country only allowed rich white men who owned a certain amount of land to take part in even a representative democracy. And it took us hundreds of years, a lot of protests and a lot of bloodshed before everyone got rights, right? Think of, this is the 1770s. It wasn't until the 1960s that African Americans got the right to vote. It wasn't until the 20s, more than 200 years until everybody got that right. Okay, now almost everybody over 18 has them. All right, so that's the information we're going to be working with today. And the other thing I want to do is just get our book ready so that when we come back tomorrow, we're all ready to start filling in our first section. So this is where you're going to need your 2 pieces of paper, and this is not complicated. 2 pieces of paper together and fold them in half like that. Make a nice crease down the center. And now you've got your book. Now on the front is going to be your title. So you can decide what your title wanted to be. I wanted to get kind of fancy with mine. I said, I'm calling my book In Order to Form a More Perfect Union. How the Founders Made a New Government. That's my title. You can think of your own title, or you can use mine if you want. You can make it kind of fancy. I'm going to go over my lettering and do some decorating later, but today we're just kind of marking things out. So that's going to be the front cover. Then you want to open up to your first page, and that first page, actually in the second page too, I'm going to write super lightly. I'm barely pressing down. Maybe my cameraman could come around here, and I'm just going to write John Locke, because that's what's going to go on this page is information about John Locke. And on this second page, also Jock. That's not what I want. John Locke. Super light, yeah? Then I'm going to turn the page, and on the next page we are going to have, we're going to compare and contrast on these two pages the governments of Athens. So again, super light, just so I know what goes there. I'll end up erasing that later. And then here, I'm going to put Rome, because these two pages are going to be about comparing and contrasting those two. And then on the next page, the next two pages, we are going to have direct democracy. We can just write DD. And on here, RD for representative democracy. Okay? Then finally, our last page is going to be about something called CV, what it's called is civic virtue. Okay? So remember when I was talking about how in a representative democracy, it's those representatives' jobs to look out for everybody. That's called the common good. What everybody needs and protecting everyone, that's called working for the common good when you're thinking about everybody. And if you are a person who is doing that, who's looking out for the common good, working towards the common good, then you have civic virtue. It's a good thing to have. It means you care about your community, your government, the people in it, and you're looking out for it, trying to make it a good place, which I hope we all do. All right, you guys, thank you for listening. Come back tomorrow and we're going to work on the first section of our book. Thank you. Bye.